Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore. Where today, we are going to have a look at a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, the Excoriators. A wonderful example of what could happen when brainwashed, indoctrinated super soldiers take their instructions a little bit too literally. Then again, considering their gene father was Rogal Dorn himself, it should hardly be overly surprising that the Excoriators have a bit of a stick up their arse. Founded in the 31st millennium, alongside the other second founding chapters during the breaking of the legions, the Excoriators are, as mentioned, an Imperial Fists chapter, formed alongside the Black Templars, Crimson Fists, and Fists Exemplars. The Excoriators were created to be part of the guard force stationed around the Eye of Terra, the Astartes Praeses, in Segmentum Obscurus. This is, in and of itself, a bit of an honor, high praise indeed, as only the most loyal, steadfast, and heroic of chapters could ever possibly be entrusted with the tremendous responsibility of guarding the home of chaos. Granted, the Imperium was a little bit iffy as to the precise effect of chaos back then, but seeing as the Imperium had just finished a bloody civil war with their corrupted brethren, the fact that chaos could turn even the finest against their brethren was self-evident. It was thus absolutely necessary to make sure that those chosen to guard the traitors' final resting place, as the shattered remnants of the traitor legions fled into the roiling depths of the Eye after the Horus Heresy, were of impeccable quality, so as to be able to resist any lures or temptations those shattered remnants or their demonic masters might still possess. And the Excoriators chapter was perfectly suited to fulfill this requirement, as it was created around a core of veterans that had committed remarkable acts of bravery and steadfastness during the Siege of Terra. In terms of reputable foundings, then, very few chapters, in fact, can match that of the Excoriators. Not only were they personally recognized by the Primarch, but they were granted the ultimate honor of forming their own chapter and the ultimate privilege and responsibility to guard what was seen then as the Imperium's most vulnerable front. Indeed, the only front. The War of the Beast was still an event in the distant future, one that the Imperium could hardly even dream of at the time, and frankly, I have a hard time believing today. And whilst the Imperium had suffered a devastating civil war, and there were still plentiful pockets of hauled-out rebels and independent mini-empires to be dealt with, the Imperium had no real, true threat at the time. The Eldar were scattered, pitiful remnants. The Necrons were still slumbering. No one had even heard of the Terranids and the Orcs, bearing in mind the absence of the Primarch Orcs. Oh, God help me. Were also considered to have been completely shattered as a genuine threat after the battle on Ulanor. And so, bloodied though it was, the Imperium appeared to reign supreme over a galaxy that was in need of a bit of tidying, sure, but nevertheless, it was a human galaxy. Or at the very least, it soon would be again. The Excoriators, under the command of their new chapter master, Demetrius Catafalque, took part in the action known as the Great Scouring, when the Loyalists sallied forth from Terra once more to bring the war to the War Master's scattered remnants. And whilst there wasn't a single Astartes counted amongst the Great Scouring's numbers that didn't have more than a half-dozen reasons to take his aggressions out on his once brethren, Catafalque and his Excoriators perhaps had more reason than most. The Imperial Fists, and Catafalco, then a captain in the Legion, took the brunt of the defensive work on the siege of Terra, standing occasionally damn near alone on the walls against the incoming hordes of the War Master. The golden armor of the Imperial Fists were battered to unrecognizable scrap and sundry in that conflict, a memory that the Excoriators carry with them to this day in their chapter's traditions as well. After the siege and the following scouring and the breaking of the legions, Demetrius Catafalco was, as mentioned, awarded the honor of creating a new chapter, the Excoriators. It was whilst organizing this fledgling new formation and travelling to their new battleground/garrison area that Catafalco penned his The Architecture of Agony, a literary work that would eventually end up as the de facto soul of his chapter. And as the name somewhat indicates, it was dedicated near completely to the value and purity of pain. It was through suffering and sacrifice, you see, that the Imperium was finally saved. Without the dogged resistance of the Imperial Fists atop the walls of the palace, the brave sallies of the assault companies that would eventually become the Black Templars would have amounted to nothing. The recapture of the Lion's Gate spaceport by Jagatai Khan and his White Scars would have meant nothing, and the eventual reinforcements by Guilliman's offensive would have come too late to do anything but stare at the ruins and the ashes. It was agony that bought victory that day. It was pain and suffering and blood and shattered armor that saw the Imperium preserved. And if a steadfast dedication to pain, to suffering, to bear what must be borne could save the Imperium and could defeat the War Master, then surely there was no conflict in which it could not bring triumph. And so the Excoriators embraced the idea. To the absolute utmost extreme, of course, because there are no values in half measures. And so the Astartes of the chapter carry out ritualistic scarification, self-deprivation, self-flagellation, and they do this to the degree where it is considered a harsh punishment indeed to be denied the privilege of self-scarification or of deprivation or other forms of mortification. Just imagine, you've been such a bad boy, you don't get to whip yourself tonight. Tragic, no doubt about it. And speaking of whippings, the chapter's love for self-imposed punishment also extends to its occasionally innovative naming conventions. By and large, the Excoriators are a codex-compliant chapter. They do absolutely and utterly disregard certain entries into the codex, anything relevant to retreat or tactical withdrawal, by and large, but they have come up with their own organizational structure. For example, one of their more prominent quirks is that squads may have two leaders, two sergeants, a squad whip and a squad second whip. A practice that even extends to the more seasoned members of the chapter, as veteran sergeants bear the names of Chief Whip and Veteran Squad Whip. Now, their actual roles and functions within the chapter is essentially that of a sergeant and his aide, or assistant, or second. There is no actual whipping into combat required, because, well, they're space marines, they hardly need convincing, the Excoriators least of all. But the naming conventions do extend to the rest of the chapter as well. Captains, for example, are referred to as corpus captains. Sanitarchs and Lord Apothecaries are also present, as well as chapter scourges and vanguards. grades. By and large, these are mostly honorary titles, rather than denoting some sort of significant deviation from the Codex Astartes, though they certainly go a long way to demonstrate the chapter's dedication to the architecture of agony, a dedication which is of course also reflected in the chapter's combat doctrine, or more correctly, its sole singular combat doctrine: attrition at all costs. Now, this does not mean last stands. It does not mean honourable but futile ends. It does not mean throwing yourself valiantly at the enemy in order to kill as many of them as possible. It means exactly what it sounds like it means: attrition at all costs. The chapter will do whatever it takes to inflict the maximum quantity of losses and damage on the enemy in trade for each and every single excoriator's life. If this can be done via tactical withdrawals or speedy maneuver warfare, then that is what the chapter will do, but it is certainly not their first choice. The Excoriators are of the opinion, and rightfully so, that they are able to take more pain, more damage, more hurt than any other thing in the galaxy. And so, more often than not, the best way to inflict an even greater hurt on the enemy is to stand there, to take their blows, to absorb their shots, and tear them apart in turn with bolter and chainsword, making every Astartes a living bunker, a breathing bulwark against the enemy's hordes, a painful obstacle which they will be left with no other choice but to surmount with a pile of their own bodies. For there is simply no misery any enemy can heap upon them that would be greater than their own anguish at failure. And most of the time, the Excoriators are absolutely correct in this assumption, as demonstrated by the simple fact that they have been around since the second founding, guarding the Eye of Terra against countless chaos incursions and 13 Black Crusades. Retconned ones as well. The Excoriators have survived on the Imperium's most dangerous, lethal, and corrupting battlefront for 10,000 years. And at least, to hear them tell it, they have not merely endured, they have thrived. Although they've certainly packed on some baggage of their own over the years as well. The Excoriators have been cursed for many millennia with what they refer to as Dawn's Darkness. This is, in essence, something mildly similar to the curse suffered by the Blood Angels, where an Excoriator can be overcome with the memories of their gene-sire, their Primarch. But whereas for the Blood Angels, this is a vision of themselves as Sanguinius on the final day of his life, for the Sons of Dawn it is instead a vision of deep sadness. As Dawn, of course, did not die a terror, but he did instead live to see the Emperor brought low, broken even in the moment of victory by his traitor son, and eventually then entombed within the Golden Throne. This would have been a world-altering event. The God Emperor, or merely the Emperor then, the seemingly ever-present beacon and guiding light of humanity, disappearing from their numbers. The loss of a father and a leader all at once. And so, instead of the berserk rage of the Blood Angels, the Excoriators fall into a state of near coma, where all but the most basic of motor and bodily functions become inoperable. They cannot speak or communicate in any way, and they become completely unresponsive to stimuli. Barely able to breathe for themselves, their bodies begin to slowly die, as they are also, of course, incapable of sustaining themselves with food or water. Their empty shells, their husks, simply begin to wither away. Slowly but surely. It takes a very, very long time for an Astartes to starve to death or die of hydration, but that is the end of every brother inflicted with dawn's darkness unless they can break out of the malaise by themselves. Over the years, the chapter has developed various forms of treatments, or at the very least of sustaining the brother in question. The Master of the Sanctity, the chief apothecary of the chapter, will take them aside and place them under special supervision. Those who are early in the malaise can be given intravenous fluids or fed via feeding tubes, although even this will not sustain them for long. Theoretically, it should provide them with all of the nutrients they need, but somehow it just doesn't work. Those who are further along and seem to be unable to wake up immediately are instead interned within specialized adamantium caskets. The casket itself is nothing particularly special. It has a simple life monitor, a way to feed oxygen into the casket, and a decorative lid, depicting the Emperor as he was at the end of the siege of Terra, broken in body but not in spirit. The idea of the casket, invented by Balthazar, was to create a sort of absolute darkness, a detachment from the outside world, where the brother inside can be in absolute privacy with his thoughts and with his dread, so that he may in turn conquer it without any disturbances, without any larger concerns, and can therefore focus his intent entirely on busting free from the darkness, to rise once more like Dawn did after his own malaise, to rise once more like the Emperor did, at least in spirit, and finally to raise the lid of the cask himself. Not all brothers recover, of course, but nor are all lost either. It is merely another cross to be borne by the Excoriators, and they bear it willingly. For it is, much like the Blood Angels, a connection to their Primarch. And no matter how negative one it might be, it is the only one they have left. And it lends itself to some pretty dramatic stories as well, like that of Zachariah Kirsch. He was once a champion of the Excoriators Chapter, one of their finest warriors, and a personal bodyguard to then Chapter Master Josiah Ichabod. But he failed in his duty, as his charge, the Chapter Master, fell to an assassin's blade wielded by an Alpha Legionnaire. The traitors had somehow managed to infiltrate the Excoriators Chapter, and discovered the Chapter Master's itinerary, including a visit to a garrison upon the planet of Ignis Prime. The Alpha Legionnaires had gathered a significant force to attack the Chapter Master and his honor guard, including much of the First Company's strength. The ambush was a rousing success for the Alpha Legion, as not only did they succeed in assassinating the Chapter Master, they also destroyed the majority of the First Company, and Ichabod's inner circle of commanders and veteran officers, effectively decapitating the entire Excoriators Chapter in one fell swoop. It was the exact kind of attempt on a Chapter Master's life that a Chapter Champion is supposed to be able to prevent. He was supposed to be able to fight his way out of any ambush, of any pinch, and at the very least sell his life and trade for that of the Chapter Master. But Kirsch had failed, and worse still, not only had he failed to detect the ambush, not only had he failed to prevent the Alpha Legion from slaying his master, he had even lost the chapter's sacred standard, the Stigmata, granted to the Excoriators personally by Rogal Dorn. No greater shame could possibly be imagined. And so it should come as a very small surprise indeed that Kirsch was heavily inflicted by Dorn's darkness, and had to be entombed within his own sarcophagus. But, luckily for Kirsch, a redemption would come. The Excoriators Chapter, along with most of the successor chapters of the Imperial Fists, partake in something called the Feast of Blades. This is a competition that has been running for the last 8,000 years, and should be carried out at least once per 100 years. Although the chapter that is currently hosting the competition, by having won the last round, is allowed to call it earlier if they so choose, but, well, the Sons of Dawn are scattered widely across the galaxy, and it is considered common courtesy to pick a time where at least the majority have a good opportunity to participate in the competition. As the name implies, it is of course a martial competition, where each chapter sends one champion to represent them. They are usually accompanied by a sizable bodyguard, and if possible, a decent delegation of the chapter should also be dispatched, as a great part of the purpose of the Feast of Blades is to encourage friendly relations, at least, amongst the various successor chapters of the Imperial Fists. As, well, even though they all share the same gene father, that does not mean that they are necessarily all that similar. Even when the Imperial Fists came together in the last wall, for example, to defeat the Beast, it was already very clear then that the chapters had drifted apart quite considerably. But, to return to the point here, the winner of the competition is granted, of course, tremendous honor, as the chapter's champion is recognized as the foremost warrior amongst all the successors of Rogal Dorn. The winner also gets to take with him a serious piece of bling as well, the Sword of Sebastus, Rogal Dorn's own blade, the one he wielded during the trials of the Iron Cage. Incidentally, it was in response to the events of the Iron Cage that the Feast of Blades was created, so it seems a suitable prize. The winning chapter also gets the honor of hosting the next competition. And it was just this competition, the Feast of Blades, that Zachariah Kirsch ended up winning after freeing himself from Dawn's darkness and rejuvenating his chapter after their tremendous loss of leadership. Zachariah would eventually go on to become the next chapter master of the Excoriators, after his miraculous survival on the cemetery world of Cetus Minor, where everyone else died. The entirety of Kirsch's Fifth Company was wiped out to the last Astartes, with the exception of Corpus Captain Kirsch himself, who was saved from the hordes of chaos at the last moment by the intervention of the Legion of the Damned, who gave the demons a taste of their own medicine. It was after this victory, and hey, it was a victory, the Excoriators had done exactly what they always set out to do: inflict maximum attritional damage on an enemy, no matter the odds, and no matter how badly outnumbered they might be. If anything, it was the perfect kind of victory to appoint a new chapter master, which was exactly what happened to Zachariah Kirsch, who serves now as the current chapter scourge of the Excoriators Chapter. a position in which he will no doubt continue to follow the teachings of the architecture of agony and remain a persistent thorn in the side of chaos, even in the current era of more large-scale bullshittery than ever. As the purposefully scarred and pitted armor of the Excoriators, with its countless dents, rivets, and burns carefully maintained so as to not expunge the memory of the Astartes' perseverance, continue to be an icon of absolute unflinching resistance. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.